of the lampstand. Aaron did so. He mounted the lamps at the front of, at the front of the lampstand as the Eternal had commanded Moses. Now this is how the lampstand was made. It was hammered work of gold, hammered from base to pedal, according to the pattern that the Eternal had shown Moses, so was the lampstand made.
Thank you. Would any thoughts or responses? I'm going to leave it up for a moment so that people can see, and I'm going to just change so I can see everyone. Yes, Kathy, can you unmute? Here, let me unmute you. Sure. There, okay. Now start from the beginning.
Oh, I just wanted to say that altar instead of mount uses light when you light up the lamps. Let's see, he lit up its lamps as the Lord had charged Moses. So it's not so much as mount, maybe mount means something different than.
If you can think of, can anyone picture an ancient, I am going to stop share and see if I can pull up an image quickly. An ancient oil lamp. Can anyone picture that? Let's do, here we go. Coming back so I can share with you guys. Here we're looking, this is what we're looking at. And ignore my little Amazon notification. There we go. There is a replica of the kind of lamp that we're talking about. So if you think about mounting it so that it's facing forward, you see how the light is actually on one side. So mount or light actually does make sense. Does that make, all right, great. Other thoughts or questions? Go ahead, Bobby.
I noticed this 7, and 7 is kind of a special number sometimes.
I mean, what are other thoughts about 7? What is 7 symbolic of, or where is?
Well, you have 7 days in a week,
right? Which is in recognition of 7 days of creation. Ellen, are you showing us something on purpose?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm showing you an actual lamp. This is the first menorah, circa AD 100. And can you see it?
No. It looks like you're showing us a chandelier almost.
Okay.
Oh, is it a picture? Is it a picture?
No, it is real. Let me get it off the wall. Okay, give me a second. I'm taking it off the wall so there's no reflection.
So while Ellen does that, 7 is 7. What else is, where else does 7 appear, and what other symbolism have?
There's also 7 in the crop rotations.
Right, and the Jubilee, the sabbatical and Jubilee is based on 7. Yes.
Also, you divide your land into 7 and you leave 1 fallow each year, and that's how you rotate and you don't abuse the land.
Fantastic. Very knowledgeable here. All right, great. Yes, yes, Christy. Thank you for putting that in the chat. 7 equals completeness or wholeness. Oh, sorry, Muriel, I meant to unmute you and you'd already unmuted. Go ahead, Muriel.
Yeah, well, so many of the holidays are 7 days, really. 7, I mean, in Israel at least, 7 days of Passover, 7 days of Sukkot, and a lot of there's a lot of 7-day stretches like that.
And Shavuot's 1 day in Israel and in the Torah, but it takes 7 times 7 to get from Passover to Shavuot.
Weeks, yeah.
Great. There's another 7 that is a very common in Judaism that I'm not hearing yet. Anyone can think of where 7 appears in a wedding?
Oh,
look at all those hands. All right. Linda Miller, you want to share?
Your 7 wedding blessings.
7 wedding
blessings. And the 7 trips around the bride and or groom, depending on.
It appears twice. Rob, do you want to have a commentary on that, or is that exactly what you were sharing?
No, those were good, but I wanted to add a commentary on the lamp. It's interesting that so much time is spent in Torah when we read these things about how we fashion things and exactly what the measurements should be. It's all tangible stuff. So God created the universe. He created the sun. He didn't really need a lamp to light up, the sanctuary or where the Jews were, where Israelites were standing, but it was something tangible. So I keep thinking about, here are these slaves that have just been freed, that they need something tangible to believe in. That's why there were so many plagues before they left Egypt, but they can't give them abstract thinking because it's just not, they weren't ready for that. So I think all of these little tangible things and the little lights are basically so the Israelites will continue to believe in God and again, respect him versus doing something that's intangible they can't see.
Fantastic. And that's such an excellent point, that we have this tension between idols and how idols make gods tangible, but we don't have idols in Judaism. So God gives us lights, lamps, which are so intrinsically metaphorical and yet concrete. All right, Ellen, I think we actually had a good view there. You can hold your
Okay, I'm trying to do it
yes,
without
right
a
there.
glare.
It's okay because I can see the lamp itself without a glare. Can everyone see that?
Mhm.
Fantastic. And I think that's important. The word, it's generally, it's interesting that they chose the word menorah there, because generally speaking, they would, in most literature, they use the word ner for a lamp like that. So when we bless the nerot on Shabbat and Hanukkah, we're blessing individual, a ner is an individual lamp like that, and a menorah is a lamp stand, which is why you keep seeing in our, thank you, Ellen, by the way, very much for sharing that with us. Why you keep seeing in, now I have to find it again. You keep seeing the word lampstand or lampstead, depending on your translation, over and over and over, not just simply lamp. So it's like it's a candelabra, as opposed to a candle holder. In other words, there's multiple nerot, there's multiple lamps of the sort that Ellen was sharing with us as part of the menorah, which had 7 nerot. So the 7 nerot together made a menorah. And so here we have multiple symbolisms, as Rob was was adding to what Bobby said. So first we have the 7, and we've explored how 7 appears over and over. And it does mean wholeness or completeness, as in the completeness of creation, right? It's a reminder of the 7 days of creation. It's also used in oaths. And if you have any doubt, the word for 7 and the word for oath is almost identical in Hebrew and has the same root. So 7 makes things binding, right? Because it is this wholeness and completeness. So you have this symbolism of the number of universal perfection, and you have lights, which we in Proverbs we read, and you saw that if you read Rabbi Gersh's Torah thought yesterday, which I just always amazes me how he squeezes into a couple words such profound thoughts. So he quotes the line from Proverbs that the soul of a man is the lamp, the ner of God, the flame. And there's this idea, that flame, that lamps are an allusion both to a human soul and to the divine. And I think this pervades human cultures. It's not just Jews who go to that symbolism for fire. I think most human cultures associate fire with the divine in some way. So here you have 2 powerful forms of symbolism, almost replacing, or perhaps exactly replacing, idols. So I really appreciate that insight, because even though I've always loved the symbolism, I never thought about how concretizing the menorah was and is and still can be, but particularly for people for whom the temple was the heart of their religion, to have this symbol. Other thoughts, any additional thoughts about the menorah or light or lamps for 7 before we move on? Jean. Oh.
It says, when you think about light from a candle or from oil, it's a halo effect. It doesn't directly go front. And while it says that the light is in the front, it really, when you think about it, it's something that really has a totally different conceptual, because when you light a candle, you light oil, it doesn't shine one way, it shines all around. And yet the rabbis kept saying in the front, which makes no sense.
Bobby.
I would think it does, because the oil lamps that we're talking about have the wick or the light toward one side. It's not in the middle. It would be the just as Jean described it if it were a candle, but these are oil lamps, I think.
Yes. So I think, Jean, were you here when I showed the picture?
Yeah.
And yeah. So I think that's what this is about. But I think your point is well taken about how light spreads and shines all around. So, but I wonder if they are trying to avoid the problematic metaphor of the light being partially blocked by the menorah itself. So, or the lamp itself. There's something else really interesting going on here. According to the pattern that the Eternal had shown Moses, so was the lampstand made. Did anyone else pick up on that? Steve Sloan.
Yeah, I noticed that just a moment ago as well. Unless there was something earlier that when there was a description of the menorah, I don't recall. But how did God actually show Moses the pattern? Did he give him a drawing? Did he stand over his shoulder and describe it to him? I'm not sure how he showed Moses the pattern of the menorah.
So contextualizing the book of Leviticus and large parts of Exodus, actually large parts of Exodus describe all of the furnishings, including the menorah of the temple and of the Mishkan and the tabernacle. So and the tent of meeting rather. So we have written descriptions, which Steve, you have commented on many times, how it's becomes a blueprint, et cetera, but it's by word and written. So this is interesting language here. David Zarno.
So what I think is fascinating about the word mar'eh, which is translated as pattern here in this English, also means mirror. And it comes from the word lirot, to see. So you're actually essentially seeing what God is seeing.
Yes.
So it's a stretch to call it a pattern. And also about the lamps and the light. Light is from a point source, such as an oil lamp, you get radiation in all directions. It's an incoherent set of light. In other words, there are many wavelengths and it's radiating in all patterns, versus a laser, which is one wavelength of light in a coherent pattern for a purpose. And so it's like this is radiating everywhere. And the only thing I can think of to say that it's in front of, opposite the face of, if you read the Hebrew, mul el paneh. It's like maybe there's some kind of a mirror behind it, or a reflection to reflect the light forward in front of the menorah, perhaps. Like the lamp itself could have had a shield in the back. Each lamp, they call it a flower, but it's really like a blossom or a stem. Each stem could have had a reflector behind it, perhaps. I don't know if there's commentary on it.
Well, so there's no descriptor of specific, like a reflector above at the level of the lamp, but the entire thing is made of gold.
Right, but I'm just saying, if part of the lamp holder on each stem had a reflector behind it to put the light in front of the menorah or opposite the menorah, we just don't know. We just don't know, because it's going to radiate, by definition. It will radiate in all directions. Right.
I'm trying to find, apparently I don't see annotate in this new version, but can you see my mouse here, folks?
Yes.
So this is the word that you were just talking about, David, mar'eh, asher her'ah. And can you say a bit about the root there?
Sure. The root is for the word to see, ro'eh, lirot, and so it's resh aleph hey. And when we talk about the first word, kamar'eh, it's like the pattern, or like the reflection, or like the mirror, which Har'e Adonai. Har'e is to cause to illuminate. It's causative. So it's which the Lord caused Moses to see.
Right. So the simplest form, this root is about seeing, which, so I think that the word pattern here is contextual, that,
Right.
and right, that's where we get that translation. But there's something super interesting in what we've understood so far to this point has been that God spoke to Moses. But now we find out that God showed Moses a pattern. And in fact, the rabbis run with this idea and talk about how the Torah was a blueprint that God used to make the universe, and then gave the blueprint, to the people. And there's this idea of this, that in some ways the Torah is visual, and that God did provide blueprints. So it's an interesting idea that kind of challenges the simple form of the story as we received it so far.
If I may add, Rabbi,
yes.
My wife, the writer, says any noun can be verbed, which is unfortunate. But here we have, instead of the word pattern, it could have been patterned for Moses. In other words, it turned it into a verb, created a pattern, meaning, like you said, the Torah.
Marian, thank you. I can't hear you, but although you're off mute. We can't hear you, Marian. I'm not sure what's going on. Can anyone else hear her? No, okay. All right. Will you put your comment in the chat, please, Marian? I'm not sure what's going on. All righty. All right. So as we continue, and I do want to pick up, and Bobby, you're going to be reading for us in just a moment. We're jumping to a related topic, but a different topic, about the Levites. And full disclosure, if you were to look at a précis of a summary of what's in this Torah portion, then you might wonder, why are we starting with chapter 8 when the rest of this Torah portion is so much more interesting? We have Miriam and Aaron accusing Moses of being a bad prophet on account of his Cushite wife, which results in all sorts of interesting stuff. We have one of the rebellions against God. We've got some like super juicy, meaty stuff, which we get to explore in different years. I thought it would be interesting to take time to explore what this next piece reveals about Israelite culture, because the next piece is actually pretty foundational to the Israelite society that is being set up in our Torah, and what it has to say about the assumptions of that society and the values of that society, which are sometimes far more unlike our own culture than we actually think. In some ways, very like. So, Bobby, will you please pick up at verse 5?
The Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the Levites from among the Israelites and purify them. This is what you shall do to purify them. Sprinkle on them water of purification, and let them go over their whole body with a razor, and wash their clothes. Thus they shall be purified. Let them take a bull of the herd, and with it a meal offering of choice flour with oil mixed in, and you take a second bull of the herd for purgation offering." And I need you to lift it a little bit.
Okay, let's see if it will let me. Yes, there we go.
Purgation offering. You shall bring the Levites forward before the tent of meeting. Assemble the...
Okay, let's see. There we go. All right. Up here.
The Israelite community leadership, and bring the Levites forward before the Eternal. Let the Israelites lay their hands upon the Levites, and let Aaron designate the Levites before the Eternal as an elevation offering from the Israelites, that they may perform the service of the Eternal. The Levites shall now lay their hands upon the heads of the bulls, One shall be offered to the Eternal as a purgation offering, and the other as a burnt offering to make expiation for the Levites.
All right, thank you. And it was a very long chunk of text, which you just read for us. So thank you for that. So here we have a ritual, and unusually for Torah, we're actually told what the symbolism of the ritual is supposed to mean. Muriel, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, probably a question. I'm noticing the difference relating to hair. We read about Samson and let his hair grow, and here we're shaving the entire bodies, it appears, of the Levites. So I think that is kind of an interesting juxtaposition.
Okay, so there's different power in hair, and you have this contrast of the Nazarite and of the story of Samson of the long hair, and there seems to be some kind of miraculous power associated with long hair. And here the Levites are actually completely shaving themselves. So that's interesting. So that's like a question. What is the symbolism there, and why are they shaving themselves? Other questions about this ritual or comments about this ritual? Were you able to visualize this ritual, or does anyone want me to talk through what is actually happening?
Okay.
All right, Steve, before that, Steve Edwards.
One of the Steves.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's what struck me about this piece was that the transmission from the people lay the hands on the Levites, and then the Levites transfer to the bull. There's usually it's Moses anointing and or the priest through class going, but there's a community transmission of authority or guilt or something going on here, which is different.
Right. So there we have the leadership of the Israelites. So that's telling us something that it's tribal heads and maybe a little bit broader. And they are bringing, and then the Levites step forward. And then we have this symbolic laying on of hands of the leadership of the Israelites. So they represent the entire community of Israel, because the Levites are an elevation offering from Israel. So who remembers what an elevation offering is? Can anyone tell me what an elevation offering is, or where else we see an elevation offering? Here, before I do that, let me just do one more time, and we'll look at the Hebrew, because as we know, sometimes a lot of the sorry, my Kindle, the translations of the offerings vary from translation to translation. What? Okay. All right, here we go. Tnufa lifnei Adonai. And there's our elevation offering. It's not the most common of offerings, but it does appear regularly in our year, that they may perform service to the Eternal. So there's something about the Levites are almost like a sacrifice. So anyone know where else elevation offerings appear? Go ahead.
I don't remember that, but it reminds me of the Azazel, the goat.
Yeah. That sent off the scapegoat that sent off in the wilderness. All right.
Isn't an elevation offering paying homage to God? Isn't that the purpose of the elevation offering?
Yes. Ellen, do you have a comment or thought?
That's what I was saying.
Yeah. Anyone else remember where it appears? All right. I believe
The term Corbin.
So the term is not korban, it is tnufa.
Corbin.
So I believe it also, and this is actually one of those little pieces that I didn't research before before our Torah study, but I believe it's the same that appears on Shavuot and on Passover, this of kind of waving offering, but I could be wrong here. Let's see. Here we go. So yes, so it's a sheaf offering and the omer offering as well. So, which then became the property of the priests. So whatever you brought as your wave offering, then that was what the priests got to eat. So here we have this interesting use of that very specific term, which so what does that say? Here we have the Levites becoming an elevation offering, which is kind of offered before God and goes into the service of God for the use of the priests. So what does that tell us about the Levites? Ellen.
They're going to be engaged exclusively in service to God. So ultimately, they had no other occupations. They didn't farm or do other stuff. They were just going to be serving God. And so everybody else kind of had to support them. And also they became the conduit for the rest of the community.
Excellent. Yes, Steve.
So I'm trying to piece this together, but I think it goes back to the golden calf, doesn't it? Where the Israelites had to atone for the sin of the golden calf and offer their firstborn to service in the temple. And somehow that got the Levites took the place of that in some way that I'm not quite remembering.
Well, you are so good. That's our next paragraph. Are you willing to read?
Sure.
You sure?
Yeah, sure.
There. All right. Here, do you mind? Let me go up a bit. Sorry. Verse 13.
How far do you want me to go?
If you can go to the end of the paragraph.
Okay. You shall place the Levites in attendance upon Aaron and his sons and designate them as an elevation offering to the Eternal. Thus you shall set the Levites apart from the Israelites, and the Levites shall be mine. Thereafter, the Levites shall be qualified for the service of the tent of meeting once you have purified them and designated them as an elevation offering. For they are formally assigned to me from among the Israelites. I have taken them for myself in place of all the first issue of the womb of all the male firstborn of the Israelites. For every male firstborn among the Israelites, human as well as beast, is mine. I consecrated them to myself at the time that I smote every male firstborn in the land of Egypt. Now I take the Levites instead of every male firstborn of the Israelites. And from among the Israelites, I formally assigned the Levites to Aaron and his sons to perform the service for the Israelites in the tent of meeting and to make expiation for the Israelites, so that no plague may afflict the Israelites for coming too near the sanctuary.
All right. Thank you. And this is very specific. We learn exactly what their role is and what's the reason. What are the reasons given for creating this caste of Levites? Thank you, Steve. Bobby.
Oh, they're saying that so that the people will be able, they won't have any disease or, to protect the people. But I'm a little bit confused, with Pidyon Ben, which sounds a lot like this. And I wonder if you can clear that up for us.
Does anyone know the answer to, first of all, can anyone explain what Pidyon Haben is? All right, David, you nod your head, you're on the spot.
Okay. Well, since I'm a firstborn, I was purchased from a Kohen. There's always a transaction, right, Steve? So it's the redemption of the firstborn from God.
Right. So even though we have this text here that says the Levites take place of all the firstborn, it also says the firstborn are mine. So there is this tradition, and it's specified elsewhere in Torah, actually, that when a boy is born, his dad has to pay the priests to continue use of his firstborn, so the firstborn doesn't end up serving in the temple, even though we kind of have this specifying that the firstborn is being replaced by the Levites, right? So it's interesting. God kind of gets it both ways, or at least the priests do. And this ceremony continues amongst Orthodoxy to this day. There's some really beautiful traditions associated with it. And then after we've shared some experiences of Pidyon Haben, I will give you my feminist sister's take when she lived in New York and was invited to a Pidyon Haben. So anyway, Muriel and then Steve Sloan.
Oh, well, we still did it. We did it.
Was somebody else talking?
Go ahead, Muriel.
Okay, interestingly enough, because my daughter, through her father, is a Levi, and they are Orthodox, their firstborn did not need opinion of Ben because she was a Levi, therefore he did not need it. And I thought that I didn't quite get how that worked, but that's what happened.
And now you do, right? The Levites are already assigned to the service.
The woman, my son-in-law is not a Levi. And I was just curious that just because, and she can't pass that on. Her children are no longer Levi's.
True.
So it's kind of interesting.
Yes, that is an interesting kind of twist of the normal logic.
Yeah.
Steve Sloan.
Thank you, Rabbi. So it's interesting that this insertion of the firstborn, and that they mention both the firstborn in Egypt and also the firstborn amongst the Israelites. How is the firstborn seen? The firstborn is the closest in age to the parent's age, and at the same time to the rest of the children. So the firstborn is considered the transmitter of the values from the parents to the rest of the family. And when in mentioning the Egyptians, when God kills all of the firstborn of Egypt, he's actually cutting off that transmission. That was part of the punishment from the Egyptian parentage to any future immediately adjacent children, the next brood, so to speak. And I think it's interesting here that you're substituting the Levites then as the transmitters of Jewish values from God to the people.
That is a fascinating interpretation. Is that your own, or did you hear that somewhere?
I'm sure I got that from Rabbi Foreman, but I probably mix it up somehow, but along the lines of.
Wonderful. Thank you. In the name of, thank you. I love that idea. And it does explain a lot that the firstborn is the link between the generations. Rob.
So the thing that gets me about what's been said so far is the fact that we're assuming that the Levites are impure because they have to be purified. And so it relates back to so-called original sin, which Jews don't believe in. So I think from what I would assume is that if you come into contact, or if you've ever come into contact with a dead body, you have to be purified before you'd even go near the tent. And so possibly this was a purification. And what Muriel said about the hair before is that you're really not purified unless your hair is gone. In fact, if you've ever gone for a surgical procedure, they always shave the surgical area. So, because hair is dirty. And so part of the purification has to be no hair.
Fantastic. So raise your hand if you've ever visited a mikvah before. So part of the process of visiting a mikvah is also removing all barriers to the water. So shaving is actually a part of that for men. Removing nail polish and clipping the nails is a part of that. So there's that, yes. And I want to distinguish between the two kinds of purity that you named, Rob. One kind of the soul, and one of the material world. So yes, Jews do not believe in original sin, but your second statement of our world exposes us to things that the Israelites deemed unclean, dead bodies. It's part of life, right? Death is part of life, and just eating dead bodies, eating meat can in some ways expose you to impurity. So there is a process of purification before approaching God, and thank you, David. You are really cracking me up this morning. So one of the things that was stated here, and I don't think it is a mild thing, is this idea that the Levites will perform this service for the Israelites at the tent of meeting, not just to make expiation for the Israelites, and so that no plague may afflict the Israelites for coming too near the sanctuary. And I think you could safely add, in a state of impurity. So in other words, the Levites now God's put an extra fence around the sanctuary of people who know they have to take their purity really seriously, and God can trust that they will, to do all of the manual labor that's needed in the sanctuary, from guarding the gate to cleaning to, as we know in later times, singing, right? The Levites were actually the chorus that would sing on the temple steps, and that's where we get psalms, which are attributed to David, but we know for sure that they were sung by Levites, at least certain ones of them. So we have this role you're born into of serving the priest and serving the sanctuary. And one of the biggest parts of their responsibility was to be in a state of purity. Right. And so, great. Thank you. So I actually think that's a big piece of it. We can't really trust those regular Israelites. We'll make a class of people who we can trust to do basically the dirty work of the sanctuary in a state of cleanliness. So, Gene.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's sort of interesting to me is that Hashem turns around and says, there's this class of people now that are separate from everybody else. So he's developing, and they're there to protect the rest of the people from getting too close to the temple, or
Yes.
to the holy temple. And then that seems a little bit strange to me, because theoretically, you can understand the high priest, but then you're saying, well, I've got the high priest here, and then I've got this other group, and it's sort of setting up a caste system.
Bingo. And we talk so often about how we are a nation of priests, right? It says in Leviticus that we are meant to be a nation of priests and a holy nation, and that each Jew had access to a certain amount of holiness and the potential for a certain amount of holiness. And this, I think, is actually in contrast to that, what is sometimes called democratizing nature of early Judaism or of the Israelite religion, because it is in fact a caste system. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to bring this to you guys, because I was struck with it when I was doing my study in preparation, that we have the priests as the highest, underneath them the Levites, and underneath them the rest of Israel. And we still see this in any synagogue that you go to that's conservative or more traditional than conservative. So we don't have it in a Reform synagogue, but if you were to go to a conservative synagogue or go to an Orthodox synagogue, in the Torah reading, the first reading is done by a Kohen, the second reading is done by a Levite, and then Israel, meaning any other Jew, can do the other readings. And so we maintain this class system in our structure of prayer, even to this day, without the temple. So
and you
now,
know,
go ahead.
I would ask one other question then. You would think going forward, then in the Hasidic religion, that only Kohens and Levites would be the people that should be in a yeshiva, because in a funny kind of way, you would think that would be the extrapolation to change it to contemporary times and say, wait a minute, the only people that need to be in the shul davening and looking in Torah and studying Torah every day are these two castes people, because they're the ones that are protecting everybody else.
Okay, that is like in my opinion, that was a bomb you just put out in the middle here. So anyone have a response to Gene? Great, Jessica.
Wouldn't that change the whole situation in Israel with the Orthodox serving in the military or not? If suddenly only the Levites and the Kohens were doing all that studying, all those Orthodox Israelites would suddenly be eligible for military service.
Oh, I am so dying to give a course right now on Jewish history, but I'm not. I want you guys to duke this out. All right, Steve Edwards.
I mean, Gene's insight underlines the difference between Israelite religion and rabbinical Judaism. Once the temple was destroyed and we became rabbinical Jews, those distinctions, while there's still some vestiges that remain, were become increasingly meaningless because they were all centered around the cult of sacrifice. And the other issue is that even looking at the Israelite religion, which is different than rabbinical Judaism, there were significant democratizing elements in it that probably, at least to my understanding, were missing from other Middle Eastern religions. So that when the temple was destroyed and rabbinical Judaism took over, those democratizing elements came to the fore. And that, I think when we're talking about Judaism, we're talking about today's Judaism, not Israel.
But the priestly castes, okay, the priestly texts were written by the priests. And the question is, were they written after the destruction of the temple or before?
Who cares?
It seems to me the priests are trying to, have their cake and eat it too. They want the benefits of it with the, getting to read Torah first and all that stuff. But, they want the other stuff too, because we'll throw the Israelites in and they get exempt from military service and all the other good stuff too, just because they're Orthodox.
But they also can't marry a convert or a divorced woman.
Right. But I think the priestly texts were written before, either concurrently with or before the temple in Jerusalem. The real question is, were they written for the desert, or were they retrojected back to the desert?
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. There's strong evidence that these texts were written down during the time of the first temple and edited together during the time of the exile between the first and second temple. There's so strong consensus amongst documentary hypothesis scholars that that's what happened. So those scholars who believe that these texts were written down by human beings, the consensus is that's what happened. So when they actually date to, and which texts date to which time period is ongoing matters of debate, and there's some areas of strong consensus and some areas of no consensus at all. So we do have that. I think that's important, Steve, that whether it was these really date to the time of the wandering in the wilderness, and if the wandering in the desert actually even happened, right? Those are good questions, but they certainly date to the first temple time. And I want to challenge and complicate a little bit that the priests are not the same as the rabbis. So yes, ultimately, the folks in power, there is a through line there, right? The rabbis eventually became the ones who had the power, but that took a long time before that was the case. And most great rabbis were not priests. We know if they're priests because they get the Kohen title added to them. Ellen.
I was just thinking that it does make sense that it was sort of retrojected back into this portion, because there's a big deal in this ritual about the leaders of the community laying on the hands to the Levites. And so, it's legitimizing this group of people. It's sort of, they've gone out of their way. They could have just said, this is what Hashem said, but they did it. This is coming up from the community to the priestly class.
Ritual really matters here. That's where we started, was this ritual that is actually quite powerful of the Israelite tribal leaders appointing essentially the Levites as their hands, their elevation offering, their hands in the temple. They're not priests, but they're the ones serving the priests and serving God in the temple. Yes, thank you. So, so there's anyway. So there's still this tension that we've been struggling with. Of is it a caste system? Is it a hierarchy that you're born into, or is this kind of a democratizing, as Judaism, a democratizing tradition that allows everyone to have access to God and holiness? And I think the answer that this text is part of the conversation, that it's complicated, that it's actually, we have hierarchy and equal access and tension. So the rabbis existed in the time of the Second Temple, and they absolutely in that time were kind of about every Israelite man having access to the law, to Torah, and to being able to do certain kinds of worship. Remember, Israelites still were allowed in the temple, right? We were allowed we were supposed to be sacrificing and bringing sacrifices and having the 3 pilgrimage holidays and the feasts associated. So Israelites had a role in the temple, and the rabbis were part of the movements criticizing the priests during the Second Temple time, when the priests and the kings were from the same family, and that was the Maccabees, that was the Herodians, and the Hasmoneans, I mean, not Herodians, the Hasmoneans. And there was a huge amount of criticism, and you got a whole bunch of different splinters, and the rabbis were one of them, if Josephus is correct. And so there we have this group that existed before the destruction of the temple that was not consensus. And there wasn't consensus even for hundreds of years after the destruction of the temple, that the rabbis had the authority and had the right interpretation of Torah. It took a while before that kind of solidified. Rob.
I just want to make a point that we always make a mistake when we extrapolate our thinking now to what happened thousands of years ago. There was no such thing as a democracy. I mean, there was no such word as democracy. So it didn't exist. So we can't expect them to act that way. And I think what a chaotic situation would be if everyone was democratized and had the right to do and go to the tent of meetings whenever they wanted to. I mean, this is obviously was a necessity, but democracy didn't exist, so we shouldn't talk about democracy at this point.
Great. And Jessica.
Well, you snuck the word men into your last statement. And I know you said you had a great story for us from your sister. Please don't forget, I'm anxiously awaiting to hear this, because of course, all of this, even though I am the firstborn of two firstborn, and we are by tradition Kohanim, wouldn't have ever applied to me because I'm a girl.
Right. So the tradition of redeeming the firstborn boy, and there's this whole service that happens in people's homes, and there's special foods that are made for the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn, and someone who is a Kohen, they hand that person a silver coin, and in symbolism of a silver shekel, which is the instruction in Torah. And my sister was working in a law office with a lot of New York Jews who gave her a very bad taste, unfortunately, for Judaism in general, and her early 20s. And she was invited to Pidyon Haben, which she didn't even know what that was. And one of her coworkers was invited as well. And her coworker said to her, like, what do I do? Like, what gift should I give for a Pidyon Haben? And my sister said, oh, well, did you give a gift at the birth of their firstborn daughter? No. Oh, yes. Did you give a gift when this child was born? Yes. So you're going to give an extra gift to the boy, but not to the girl. And that was my sister's bottom line take. She's like, that was not fair. Don't give anything. So she ended up not going. And that was actually one of the things I think that turned her off from Judaism for quite a while. So because of that built-in extra valuation of the male over the female. So yeah. All right. Lori, are you going to end this Torah study? You raised your hand. So I know you're
No, this has been such an interesting conversation. And I'm just tying in a couple of thoughts that other people had already brought up. And that is, Steve had mentioned the idea of the golden calf. Rob had talked about, how other religions may have. I just feel that this is kind of a carry-on. I have to wonder, this kind of cult of the male-to-male transmission and the redemption by the male-to-male transmission. I find very interesting, and of course we see echoes of that in Christianity. So I can't help but wonder, is this really more of an echo of the pagan past of these people, this idea of the bulls and so forth? And I will also say, we're all referring to this like it's so, ancient. Around the corner of our apartment on 85th and West End in Manhattan, there is a very Orthodox deli, and they have a big sign that says, bulls will be offered. And I have walked past this for decades, and this big picture of the red heifer and so forth. And it harkens to this idea of the Messiah and so forth. Again, it's like, I don't know, the beginning of the patriarchy, but it is still very much present in current thinking. And, as I walk past this bulls will be offered and then reading it today, it's just very interesting to me. And, although it seems ancient, I can tell you at 85th and West End and in many parts of very religious Judaism, this is, of the topic. So, things don't have to be binary. I mean, we're here with a female rabbi. That's kind of the beauty of Judaism, that, those waiting for the red heifer and so forth, or, Klal Yisrael, that's all I can say. But I'd be interested in just some historical understanding of all this.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. There is something that is contextual about a priestly class and then the class that serves them, about the idea of the firstborn being gods, and there being something extra holy about the firstborn that is native to the area where our people, the Israelites, became a people and developed this monotheistic religion. And I think the idea of this tension between equal access and hierarchy, which is so embedded in Judaism, along with multiple other tensions, like the idea that being Jewish is the best that being male, really, a male-free Jew, is the best that a human being can be, in tension with Jewish values that every human life is created in God's image and is worthy of love and dignity and being treated with respect. And these are both big Jewish ideas that are constantly in tension, the particularism and the chosenness of Judaism with the universalism of the worth of every human being. And I think there's a similar kind of tension here between the hierarchy that's not just existing, but perhaps has a really important role to keep order and structure to society and to Israelite society for sure, and the importance of every person in the community feeling like they're part of something holy, whether they're male or female.
I just feel, to Jessica's point, I have been kind of playing, and I don't mean to be a broken record. I am not always looking at life always through a feminist point of view, but there are times I do, and often I am when I look at ancient texts. And I was kind of experimenting in this conversation today. If you change the word from people to male, which is really what we were talking about, it sounds different. And I kind of encourage people to play with that from time to time. If you'd use the word male for all of this, the priests, the people, if you'd said men, boys, whatever, it feels different. And I encourage people to try that in a similar way to when sometimes in the news, when you look at big crowds, sometimes in the Arab world, and it'll say a group of people, it's actually a group of men. And I think that correcting our language elevates us. I do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lori. Go ahead, Bobby.
I appreciate what you just said, that it elevates us. But I just wanted to point out that with a Pidna Ben, the child has to be male. That's the firstborn. It's not if there's a firstborn girl and then a male, that male does not participate in this Pidyon event. I think the verbiage is something like the one that opened her, male that opened her womb. So it's even more discriminatory. But,
right. What happened? What, doesn't the firstborn daughter count?
No, apparently not.
So Steve Edwards, you made this joke in the chat, ritual lives matter, and it's your fault because now that's in my head. And the critique of the Black Lives Matter movement, and before it existed as a movement, of the establishment of wealth that has been denied to Black Americans and given to white Americans, and that becomes generational and perpetuating, that often wealth can be handed down generation to generation to help establish the next generation. And that has been denied going back to the promise of 40 acres and a mule to Black Americans. And I see that in our text in a different way, right? The Kohen gets the shekel. And there's an establishment literally of the Kohen in traditional Jewish communities far after the destruction of the temple as an establishment, as an inheritance that actually has wealth accrued to it, and is able to pass down. And similarly, you have the same kind of imbalance with men and women, where when you keep preferring men to women, you create a self-perpetuating power imbalance, which absolutely is, we call patriarchy, and absolutely exists in Jewish tradition. And in some ways, the rabbis were worse than Torah. Torah was pretty bad in some ways, but there were some aspects that where the Torah gave women certain rights and the rabbis took them away. And so as much as the rabbis also tried to give access, they also created a different hierarchy that was based on yeshiva. And I'm trying to remember who said this, but the Hasidic movement is actually, while it lives in Orthodoxy, was a critique of that of that model, that money and scholarship gave you access to God in a way that the lack didn't, and that existed in rabbinic Jewish communities, which was the majority of world Jewish communities. And that was the Hasidic critique, that no, you don't have to be a scholar, ergo you don't have to have all of that inherited wealth and power. You can be any human being, man, generally speaking, there was an imbalance in their language there, and an absolute preference for men's access to spirituality, but that any man, no matter how poor, could have access to spirituality and to God, perhaps even more than someone who was a scholar. So in our tradition, we constantly have innovation within tradition, and we have a challenge, and we have challenges that challenge the power, and we are living through the result of one of those challenges, right? Where 40 years ago, 50 years ago, women in Judaism really challenged the patriarchal bases, and it's taken a long time to change things, and things aren't completely better. But now we have me here at Temple Bat Yam, and we have an associate cantor who's a woman also, and women have, and we've had a long history of female presidents at Temple Bat Yam, and women have absolutely been in leadership and voices of power, but it takes a lot more than 40 years to recover from imbalances like that. And the same goes for other kinds of built-in imbalances of power. So there is my little on one foot, the connection between our Torah study and Black Lives Matter, which I think in some ways do exist, because our structural hierarchies create structural imbalances and create order as well. Rob, did you have a comment?
No,
okay. Steve.
I just wanted to mention parenthetically, go back to last week's Torah portion, that although only men could serve as Kohen or the high priests, that the Nazarites could, as decreed by God, could be a man or a woman if they wanted to have this certain special connection with God. Although they would not have the prestige of the priests, they would have this other spiritual connection to God as a Nazarite.
Fantastic. Before we leave, I think I want to share a bit of Orthodox feminism. I don't know. Oh, Jim, did you have a comment before I do that, or is it? Nope. Okay. So in traditional Orthodox Judaism or rabbinic Judaism, pre-Orthodoxy, women were slowly denied access to power that they theoretically should have access to. And it was entirely because men felt threatened by women's sexuality. And so you hear that a woman cannot read from the Torah in front of the community because it insults the honor of the community. And women cannot sing in front of men because the voice of a woman would seduce the men in the room. And these are all quite problematic. And so there was a teshuvah, a rabbinic answer given by an Orthodox rabbi, I think close to 30 years ago now, who was a Brandeis grad, this is important to me, who said that this tradition of insulting the honor of the community depended on the community. And if a new community came up that said a woman's voice does not insult our honor, then a woman can read from Torah in that community, but it has to be a new community. So this was exactly what I'm talking about, innovation within tradition. So now there is a synagogue in Jerusalem. I think it's Shir Hadash. There's a Shir Hadasha and Shira Hadasha and Shir Hadash. So if anyone knows offhand, I can put that in the chat which the correct one is, where there is a mechisa, women and men are divided. but women lead certain parts of the service. There's other parts where still, according to rabbinic law, they feel they can't lead, they can't fulfill the mitzvah of like the Amidah, but women read from Torah. And so here you have women somewhat, not quite, but almost equal in leadership, in the visual leadership of the Shabbat morning Torah service, which is within the structure of a rabbinic traditional Orthodox congregation that was founded to be a feminist Orthodox congregation in Jerusalem. So I think that might be a voice of hope, of innovation within our tradition, that you don't have to throw it all out as we've Reformed Jews kind of did, but you can in fact creatively innovate. Shabbat Shalom, thank you all. Oh, wait, sorry, Jessica, closing thought?
Raymond just said it's Sharat Chadashah.
Sharat Chadashah, definitely worth visiting if you are in Jerusalem. Thank you all, Shabbat Shalom. It is, oh, Sandra, I'm seeing lots of
Hi.
Hi.
Would you all please join us for Rosh Kodesh, done by Rabbi Miriam? It's on June 10th at 7 p.m. The link will be sent out shortly.
Are men invited too to this
Of
Rosh Kodesh?
course.
All right.
Please.
All
I think
right.
men will find it interesting. You want to tell them the topic?
We're looking at the source of Rosh Chodesh as a gift to Israel in general and women in particular. So
I think it ties in to today's discussion.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Boker Tov.
Shalom.
Enjoy your morning. Enjoy your Shabbat. It's lovely studying with all of you. Oh, happy birthday, Jim. All right. Sorry. Go ahead. What were you saying?
This was off topic because I was studying this during the week, getting into Beha'alotcha. And one of the things we came about, which was, according to Rashi, God never spoke to Moses. God never speaks to anyone. God speaks to himself, and Moses was privileged to listen. It's a really fine hair, but why it came up in this parsha when instances happened prior was very thought-provoking for me. And I didn't want to interrupt this conversation because that wasn't part of the, where you were going. But I'm just wondering if you had heard that before or had any opinion on that. Because that, for all the inferences, not in the dreams to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but for all, once we got the Torah, once people were talking, God never actually spoke. He is so far beyond our comprehension that he only speaks to himself. And it was privileged for Moses to listen and interpret.
That's beautiful. That actually sounds like a Hasidic interpretation.
Yeah, it was a Rashi comment in what we're studying. So I just want to know if
there's a point in Rambam also based on this Torah portion. For some reason, this Torah portion, I would guess part of it is that language of that God had shown to Moses, the pattern that God had shown to Moses. But I'd have to go back and see what the spring text was. No, actually, it was the next piece, the second Pesach Sheni, which we didn't get to.
Right.
There was a whole discussion, particularly in Ramban for some reason, about how Moses is actually the only prophet that God speaks to, and which it says that God spoke to Moses face to face. So the simple interpretation
that was the
is that God
conflict.
did.
If it says he spoke to him face to face,
yeah.
And yet Rashi is interpreting and saying God is so beyond that Moses was the privilege of listening. God talks to himself and Moses listened. So it's like, well, how if he talks face to face, then
utterances,
So that's a midrash, and the beauty of midrash is that it invites us into a new way of experiencing or understanding Torah that might be in tension with the simple text, and that's okay because it's a different access point to truth. And
well, that's all I have here is
Yeah.
the Hasidic Rashi interpretations.
So what is that? What for you? What is that? What is inspiring or compelling for you about that idea that Moses just listens in, God's talking to God's self?
Well, it's just how does it refute our, your understanding from being a child and learning about Torah, and all of a sudden saying God never spoke directly to Moses. It was how he communicated to Moses. And Moses is supposed to be listening and gleaning from what God says. And that's his way of then interpreting it to the people. So did God speak actually like I'm talking to you when we say face to face? Or was it gleaned from the heavens and Moses was interpreting, listening, interpreting? It's a very esoteric and very good intellectual conversation.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a right or wrong, but I'm just saying it makes you think about how we're taught and what your preconceived notion is, and then this interpretation comes up.
Steve Stone.
I got a different read on the connection with Moses altogether, although that interpretation is rather poetic. This was a video that I saw that was talking about kind of two essential qualities of Moses that set him apart from everyone else. One was that he
humble
is the one person that survives a direct encounter with God at Sinai. In fact, everyone else can't even approach the mountain or they'll be killed. And the other is his that he's the most humble man on earth.
Right. Well, yeah.
And the connection was made in this video, to be short about it, that it was because of Moses's innate humility that he was able to survive a direct encounter with God. He becomes God's trusted one. In fact, I think that is the translation of Hebrew that's used at one point, that he is he's there to serve, that he's not egoless in the sense that he's different from every man, but that he's in service to God. And that the only person who can really be trusted when you're one in power is someone who is of service, dedicated to service of that power.
Are there other responses to this midrash that Jim shared? Anyone else have any thoughts or responses?
There was also Moses was extremely fit because at his age, he went up the mountain and he was told, as soon as he got there, he was told to go back down. So, and then he had to go back up again.
And you know how heavy those stone tablets were?
Yeah.
Right?
So you look at something like that,
they're stone.
If you're schlepping up a mountain, and then you got to go right back down as soon as you get there, and then you got to go back up again.
And go back up again. And
he's got to be, at his age.
Yeah, other Steve Edwards.
There's a lesson that I think, Jim, I think that's a really cool thought. And I think that there's a lesson in it for us too, because we can listen, and maybe we can't listen like Moses, but we can still listen, and we can glean from the world, from nature, from everything around us, where the divine, what is divine in that environment. So I think that's a great way to look at things.
Peter, Paul, and Mary, the answer is blowing in the wind.
So actually, Jim, it is and Steve, I think your extrapolation is spot on. This is how the Hasidic movement was completely revolutionary and heretical, because if you think that Moses was just listening in, that Moses was just tuned to nature, to God in nature, and was able to give us the Torah from that, then in fact, all of us have access to revelation in creation that we live in if we can tune our ears to the universe, if we can tune our ears to the world. And there's tons of Hasidic writing on tuning to the radio waves of the birds and the breeze and the ocean, right? If we can tune to the universe, then potentially someone who's very pious and high level can actually understand it. In which case, revelation did not end in the prophetic period, which was pretty heretical. Okay, Sophia.
Take it easy.
Isn't the meditation that about?
Pardon, say that again, Sophia.
Isn't meditation is what it is about?
What is answer that question? Yes.
Jewish meditation is basically what it is.
Yeah.
Listening to that.
Right. That's right. Well, thank you, Jim, for, though I think we just lost him, for bringing this very different blessing and reminder to us to tune into the universe as we say Shabbat Shalom. It's lovely to study with all of you and to learn from all of you.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.